Hello. The Divine Code for July 16th, pages 77 and 78. We're in the chapter of liability to divine and earthly punishments. Halakha number 3. A Gentile who is forced to transgress one of the 7 Noahide commandments is exempt from liability to physical or spiritual punishment for committing the transgression. Even if one is being first forced to serve idols, he is permitted to do so, and he is not obligated to give up his life to avoid this. This applies to other Noahide commandments as well. The Rambam Laws of Kings 10:2. Except for the prohibition against murder, for which a Gentile must submit to even being killed in order to avoid being forced to commit the transgression. Regarding one who is being forced to injure another or to rape a woman or a man, see Part 5. That's the section on Part 5 is the section on the prohibition against murder. Just as it is permitted to transgress other than committing murder, injury, or rape, if coercers force one to do so upon pain of death, so it is permitted to heal a person even if it involves a capital transgression, if it is a matter of life and death. A person is not obligated to give up his life in order to not to transgress the commandments, other than for the exceptions cited above. For example, one may heal a person by feeding him meat that was severed from a living animal, if the person will die if he does not eat this forbidden meat. No other option is available. Neither the healer nor the patient is liable for this. So if something comes up and the only way to help save a person involves breaking one of the Noahide commandments other than the Noahide commandment against murder, then it's more important to save a life. And the reason murder would not be acceptable is because you can't take one person's life in order to save another. That doesn't work in the equation. However, if it's anything else other than murder, it's okay to do something, whatever is necessary to save a person's life, whether it be one's own life or if it be another person's life. If a Gentile is being forced to commit any act which is a capital sin within the Noahide Code, the question of whether or not he is permitted to give up his life in order to avoid the transgression is explained in Chapter 5, Part 5, Chapter 2. And that chapter is on the questions of suicide and whether a person is permitted to give up his life under certain circumstances, and that's in it. It goes into some detail, and that's part of the Divine Code reading in December. A Gentile is not obligated in the precepts of the Noahide Code or their liability until he or she knowingly is knowledgeable and responsible for his or her actions. This age is 13 full years for a male and 12 full years for a female. Some opinions say that even a minor who is knowledgeable prior to this age is responsible. So there's a certain it's a logical aspect to this, and one question is whether we follow the Jewish halakha regarding this when a person becomes liable based on their age, or if it's when a person comes to the point where they're able to figure out these things. They have a maturity to them that they can understand right and wrong, and to the level that where there would be liability. And there's also a question of whether the in the Jewish system, the person should do what's right as soon as they're able to in a child's age. When they turn either 12 or 13, they are required to do what is right and prohibited to do what's wrong. And then at a later age, they would be held liable. A Jew, just because they're bar mitzvah at the age of 13, they would not necessarily be liable for a transgression until several years later. It's done in stages, and the question is how do those stages work for a non-Jew? And I'm sure that'll be gone into more detail in the later section on the establishing courts of law as to how exactly that works. One who is not knowledgeable, such as a deaf mute, one who is mentally incompetent, or a minor, is exempt from any liability. So people that don't have we don't really have an expectation that they should, there's understanding in these cases for people. Somebody who in our regular court systems, we make these exemptions, and they have to be decided upon on a case by case basis. Halakha number 5. No, I'm sorry, there's a footnote on this. There is a lengthy debate between the later rabbinic authorities, Akroyim, regarding to the age of legal majority of Gentiles. Chatan Sofer, Yoredea 317, and Minhok Chinuch Commandment 160, based on a responsa of Rosh, say that there is no set age and is different for each individual. Other authorities point out from the Rashi on Tractate Nazar 29b, it is understood that the age of majority is a natural phenomenon and not a decree of Torah law. So there should be no difference between the age of majority for a Jew or a Gentile. The Sadi Hamid states that a simple interpretation of Rambam follows this opinion. So there's differences of opinion regarding whether a person is, based upon their level of maturity as to whether the person will be liable, or if it follows, if the Jewish understanding of 12 years or 13 years is a natural phenomena that would apply to both Jews and non-Jews. So there's differences of opinion on how that age works. Halakha number 5. One who is intoxicated is considered to be competent for all matters, and if he violates any of the 7 Noahide commandments, he is liable for punishment. However, if he reaches the intoxication of Lot, where he is not cognizant of his actions, he is exempt from punishment. That's explained in Rambam's Laws of Kings, chapter 10, Halakha 2. So the Torah liability, if a person is inebriated beyond knowing anything, he would not, from a Torah perspective, be held accountable for his actions. Courts of law can determine past that whether or not they would institute any liability for the person. But from a Torah perspective, that person would not be held liable at that point. Halakha number 6. It is forbidden for a Gentile to mislead or convince another to sin. Therefore, it is forbidden to teach others to serve idols or to seduce a man or a woman to commit adultery, or to convince another person to murder or steal. Likewise, any action that necessarily causes or helps another person to violate one of the 7 Noahide commandments is forbidden. For example, this is a motivation for observing a decree of modesty in dressing, as will be explained in part 6, chapter 6, entitled Guarding Against Forbidden Relations and Following the Ways of Modesty. So that would be one example for not causing another person to sin, would be that we should live according to modesty and not behave in ways that can cause other people to go on the wrong path. It appears that this obligation comes from a commandment of dinam, establishing righteous laws in courts. Because Gentiles are commanded to influence others, or, if possible, even to force others to keep the 7 Noahide commandments and not to transgress them. For example, by establishing a system of enforceable justice with courts and police officers. So how much more are they forbidden to transgress their commandments of dinam by convincing another to violate one of these commandments? This is written about in Beit Ha-Ozar by Rabbi Yosef Engel, Rule 131. So it's under the laws to establish the courts of justice is to convince people to behave in a proper manner. And coinciding with that would be a prohibition against causing people to break commandments. So it would not necessarily be a violation of that commandment to cause another person to break that commandment. If a person influenced somebody to eat a limb of a living animal, they caused them to break that command, the person who did the convincing would not necessarily be held liable under the prohibition against eating limb of a living animal, because he didn't do that. He caused someone else to do it. However, he would be breaking the commandment against establishing a court of requiring establishing a court of law, and therefore that's the area that he would be in violation. It appears, however, that anything which is only a cause and does not force someone to do something wrong, it is permissible for a Gentile to do, since he has no prohibition against placing a stumbling block before another. However, whether a Gentile's intention is clearly to influence the other person to serve idols or violate one of the other 7 Noahide commandments, it is forbidden. All right, so simply doing something that inadvertently causes a person to do something would not necessarily be a violation. Now, courts of law can make rules saying you're not allowed to do these activities. You know, having limbs of living animals available at a if a person had a limb of a living animal available for sale at a store, it doesn't mean that someone's going to eat the limb of the living animal. He could, I don't know, I'm not really sure what a person would be allowed to do with it, but if he's not eating it, if he's going to turn it into fertilizer and fertilize his crops with it, you know, something that would not necessarily be a prohibition. That might cause someone to actually eat the limb of a living animal, but if he's not convincing people to do it, it would not, according to this, it would not be a Torah prohibition. Now, courts of law might make a rule saying you're not allowed to have limb of a living animal inside the store, because the courts of law is going to say, wait a minute, you know, we need to put a fence here and prevent people from having that, where it might be used in a way you might expect people to use it. But it would not be a Torah prohibition as long as the person is not actively trying to persuade other people. However, wherever a Gentile's intention is clearly to influence the other person to serve idols or violate one of the other 7 Noahide commandments, is forbidden. But he is not liable for capital punishment. In the special case of one who hires an assassin, which is definitely a transgression of the Noahide code, the person is not liable for a capital punishment by a court, but he is liable for punishment by God, as will be described in will be explained in chapter 5, topics 1. In part 5, chapter 1, halakas 5 and 6, in the subsection on details and examples of the prohibition of murder. So this is something that will come will be explained in more detail at that time. Thank you.